That was NDP leader and the leader of the official opposition, Jack Layton. Now, following the announcement of the new cabinet, I spoke with three party commentators. Bill Pristanski is a former executive assistant to former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. Pierre Naud is the deputy director of strategic communications for the NDP. And Don Boudria is a former Liberal cabinet minister. What are your observations about what we've seen here from Prime Minister Harper?
Well, what I look for in a cabinet is the power structure of the cabinet committee system, because that's where the decisions are made. And certainly Jason Kenney has a big promotion. As you know, Jason Kenney did a lot of legwork in all those urban ridings, reaching out to all kinds of multicultural groups, including them in the Conservative Party. And that's where many of the gains were in 416 in Vancouver, and we now are a party that has both urban, rural, and suburban representation. So
he remains the Minister of Immigration, but he
keeps that job, but he's now the chairman of the Operations Committee of Cabinet, which is sort of like the Deputy Prime Minister role. It's what Jim had when he was in cabinet, and then of course he's gone off to be a banker. So John Baird had held that position. Now he's Foreign Affairs, so he can't really chair the Operations Committee of Cabinet because he's going to be out of the country so much. So Jason Kenney, big promotion there. In Quebec, Paradis is not only got a promotion, but he's also now the chairman of the Economic Committee of Cabinet, a crucial committee in the cabinet. He's chairing that committee. And Denis Lebel, he's going to be a very busy guy. Not only does he keep his portfolio, which was the economic development for Quebec, he's got a big promotion going to transport, but he's on P&P, the Priority and Planning Committee, which is chaired by the Prime Minister. He's on the Operations Committee of Cabinet. He's also on the Economic Committee of Cabinet. He's going to be one busy guy. And then an interesting thing, the strategic operating review that the public service is going through to find ways to cut money from the government. They're looking for billions of dollars of savings. That's going to be headed, of course, by the Treasury Board President, the new Treasury Board President, Tony Clement. But Ted Menzies, as a junior Minister of Finance, has been made the Vice Chair of that little subcommittee of Treasury Board. And that's a big promotion for him.
All right. Pierre Naud, what are your observations on, now that we know the composition of this cabinet, what do you think?
Well, the Prime Minister had a chance there to send a message to Canadians, to tell them we've heard what you wanted to tell us during, on the election day, that you wanted some change. And of course, in this case, coming back with all the same people, the message didn't get through. There's very few changes, and especially in places like with Bev Oda going back to CEDA and Jason Kenney going back to immigration after what happened at the end of the session. This is just showing us that ministerial responsibility doesn't exist anymore in this country. And when you go to the House Leader as well, you get the same reaction. I mean,
Peter Van Loan is back as the House Leader.
We extended a hand for cooperation, and with Mr. Van Loan in this position, I doubt highly that this is going to be possible.
Well,
so
it
has in the case of
okay.
Exactly.
Let Pierre finish here, and
maybe
we'll have a chance
finish
to.
In the case of, I was going to say, but talk about Quebec, saying that, well, of course, when we have those four ministers, two of them I hardly see as ministers. That again, minister by default, as I was saying earlier.
Who's that?
In the case of Bernier and Blaney. Blaney, I mean, let's remember, we're talking about the guy at the beginning of the campaign who went to say to people, remember, sky is blue and hell is red. This is the old Duplessis saying in Quebec, and and this I couldn't believe that in 2011 we hear that from a politician. You have two people which seems to be a little weaker, and Bernier we've seen why in the past, but altogether. And I was talking to Don about that a couple seconds ago. We don't see a lot of francophones on that cabinet either. So Quebec being one thing, francophones being another one. This leads me to think that while cooperation is not going to be there for sure, that francophones are not going to be as represented as it was in the past, and this just raises more questions in my case.
All right, 39 ministers in this cabinet, 10 women. Don Boudria, what are your observations?
A couple of them. First of all, the size of the cabinet. The Prime Minister said he wanted to send a message about the government cutting, not being wasteful, and so on, and has the second largest cabinet in history, only exceeded by another Conservative Prime Minister of some note, Brian Mulroney. I know, of course, you cannot judge a government's capacity to balance a budget by that, but it certainly sends the wrong message. It gives the wrong signal. In terms of Tony Clement being a Treasury Board in charge of administering all this, I mean, is this the same Tony Clement who spent all that money in his riding, the G8, G20 money, and so on and so forth? A lot of people are going to question, is this the right minister to be in charge of belt tightening? a lot of people I think are going to question the wisdom of that decision. I agree with Pierre here on Mr. Van Loan. Maybe we're going to have a new Peter Van Loan, one who will do things differently, but I think the House was almost universal in condemning him in the past for how poorly he did the job, and Jay Hill took over from him, and Jay Hill was a very partisan individual and was deemed to be a huge improvement over his predecessor. And then, of course, John Baird took over from him, and I think did a very good job as House leader. So I think there's some step backwards in that regard there. It's true, as others have pointed, that Mr. Paradis has received a huge promotion out of all of this. And
Christian Paradis goes from natural resources to industry.
Oh, well, yes, that and his cabinet committee functions and so on. And, of course, so has Mr. Lebel. Both of them have had important promotions in all of this.
Okay, but Pierre had mentioned there doesn't seem to be francophone representation, but the francophones that are there, you're saying, have been given big jobs.
Oh yeah, they're power. There's no doubt. Some of them are powerful. Some, of course, are not. There's no doubt that the new minister of small business doesn't have a very strong position, Mr. Bernier. But again, this is a chastened Mr. Bernier who's coming back into cabinet, and maybe the Prime Minister thought that he had to ease him in, as it were, and kind of give him a second chance to prove himself, and perhaps that's why he's starting him at a level which is far lower than his capacity. Now, he's exercised poor judgment in the past, we know, but I think he's probably paid for his.
Let's talk a little bit about geography here. 22 extra seats for Conservatives in Ontario and Toronto, a lot of them in the Toronto area, and yet only Joe Oliver and Bella Gossel who make it into this cabinet. Is the Prime Minister going to have some problems here with all those names that were talked about? Kelly Leitch, Chris Alexander, Mark Adler, Stella Ambler, all these names that were talked about in Toronto who are not in this cabinet.
Well, Kelly Leitch is from southwestern Ontario, of course, but yes, no, look, these people will likely be parliamentary secretaries. It's a great place to learn how Parliament works. They'll probably be assigned to very senior ministers so that they can learn from those ministers, and it's a 4-year term. So the names that you just mentioned, I'd be willing to guess that many of them will be ministers before the next election. But I think it's prudent. Look, the Prime Minister said several times an hour, as we joked earlier, during the campaign, strong, stable majority government. And what this front bench is a strong, stable majority government. These are people with experience in politics and in Parliament, and who've been given the job now of running the country.
So when Pierre talks about the need for cooperation and Peter Van Loan being the wrong guy to put in his, and Don Boudria mentioned it too, do you think that matters in a majority government? Do you care whether the opposition critics aren't happy with Peter Van Loan?
It should.
Look, the Parliament is going. All parties have said they want to make Parliament work better. All the people running for Speaker have said that they want to make Parliament work better. I think it's up to every parliamentarian. It's not just up to the government House leader to make that happen. And government House leader will take his marching orders from the Prime Minister and the Cabinet on what kind of tone they want to set. I think they want to set a tone of getting down to work, solving the economic problems of the country. That's what people elected them to do, and that's what they're going to do. Now, the role of the new, large NDP opposition is to oppose that, and is to put forward other ideas. And if some of those ideas are accepted by ministers, they'll be accepted. But I think that all parliamentarians and the new Speaker and the new House leader, the Prime Minister, the new leader of the opposition will all have a part in how will the tone work. So we'll see as it unfolds.
Pierre Naud, if you think there were missed opportunities here, and you talked a bit about it earlier, what's the biggest missed opportunity that Stephen Harper
for me it was
failed to take advantage of here?
Yeah, well, in my case, I would just come back to what I was saying about Bevoda and Jason Kenney. I mean, some things were done at the end of the last session. You have an opportunity to show Canadians that, as my colleague here was saying, that yes, you do want Parliament to work. Well, you have a chance here to show Canadians something concrete, something something real to make government work, not to reward somebody who actually ended up in committee and for ethical issues. And actually we have to remember that the government fell on those ethical issues, not on the question of the budget. So as far as I'm concerned, I thought that in my mind I was thinking, well, he's not going to come back with those people, or if he does, actually it's not going to be, there's going to be a demotion, because he wants to send a message. He wants to say that things are going to be different. He wants to say that we will work to make Parliament work. Seeing those two people, I think it's a missed opportunity, essentially because of that, because of the message which could have been sent. Now I know that there was those loyalties within the party, but again, I mean, how as an opposition are we going to put the government to the test? It's going to be simple. It's going to be, are they ready to put political games aside and work for the good of Canadians? And seeing those two people in the same positions in cabinet makes me doubt that.
Well, Don Boudria,
I share the view on one of the two, but not on the other. I'm not surprised at all that Mr. Kenney is where he is. I am surprised at Bavoda. I think there was considerable speculation in the media that she wouldn't get a cabinet position at all, or she would get a reduced one, and certainly no one thought that she would remain in the same position after having been found to be in contempt of Parliament while being in that position.
So
that's the reason we got the election in the first place.
So what do you think that says then?
I don't know. It says the Prime Minister somehow still had faith in her, or doesn't care what Parliament thinks. He's going to have to explain that himself.
This is the group photo of the new cabinet. As you look at these faces we've seen at the swearing-in ceremony, and now we see them. We just take a shot of this as we watch them having this official portrait taken. But Don Boudria, let me ask you, what's in a reduced Liberal Party, a number of seats in the House, no longer the official opposition, you're looking across at essentially the key front benches, ministers in the front benches that you looked at before. How powerful is a Liberal opposition going to be in the next Parliament?
Well,
with 34 seats.
Well, the Liberals lack in numbers, obviously. We'd like to have a lot more of them. I was very saddened to hear this morning that my very good friend Anthony Rota lost on the recount, for instance, in North Bay, and that's very sad. But in any event, those who are left, though, 32 out of the 34 are experienced MPs. So they, almost 95% of the Liberal caucus are people who have asked questions in the House in the past. So they have, perhaps not numerically, but qualitatively, I think I would say, they're well equipped to start the session. Next week they'll appoint their interim leader, and then he will appoint the critics, whip and House leader, and so on, he or she, and then they'll be able to start right away on the first day when the House comes back, and their MPs largely don't need too much of a briefing on what it is you're supposed to do when you're a member of Parliament and sitting in the opposition benches. Probably every single one of them is going to be a critic of something or other.
Bill, do you want to? We've heard significant criticism of this new cabinet. You want to respond to something?
Well, the comment on ethics. There was a vote in the House of Commons where the majority of the people in the House of Commons voted one way, but the majority of the people in Bavoda's riding, and probably the largest majority of any MP, Jason Kenney, I think he had the most votes, plurality in any riding. They said, we want to send these people back to Parliament. So the people get to decide this. And the Canadians have spoken.
Well, let's get the view now from members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery. CPAC's Martin Stringer spoke with two journalists who attended the cabinet swearing-in this morning.
You were